The Justice Department released a summary of the Mueller report last week because the New York Times sought it out through a Freedom of Information request. Now, this is a really confusing story, and we're going to try and break it down because it involves so many pieces that are still in play, right? Still exerting power over our lives. So Trump, Ukraine, the U.S. Justice Department, Russia, the Biden administration. I have to think that maybe the government is banking on us not understanding this so that we continue to support this war, which is why I spent the day trying to understand it. And I'm still not sure I do, but let's see what we can do. Okay. Recall the Mueller investigation. This was a special counsel appointed to the FBI to investigate why then President Trump fired then FBI Director James Comey and whether or not it was to protect himself from exposure from potentially illegal activity related to Russia. Okay, it was led by former FBI Director Robert Mueller. Now, it was extensive. It was expensive, and it ended kind of like a pop balloon that no one heard because it was so politicized. The Mueller investigation was split into 3 different camps. They called it Team R, which investigated everything related to Russian interference in the election. Team 600, which investigated everything related to Trump's possible obstruction of justice, and Team M, which investigated anything related to Paul Manafort. Now, Team M was led by Andrew Weissman, who wrote a book on his investigation. This newly released summary was written by Weissman's team about the work of Team M, right? So it's all about Manafort. This summary is, again, heavily redacted, but it does track what Weissman says in his book. I actually did read this book when it came out, so I have a little perspective about it. Weissman wrote his book because he says he doesn't agree how Mueller investigation, how it ended, how it was politicized. And this memo that was released this week, he wrote for the same reasons. Now, we don't have similar memos from Team R or Team 600 because the people who led those investigations didn't write a book or leave a memo or paper trail of discontent. Now, Weissman starts the book detailing how he had finished up his work on the investigation. He was driving back to his New York apartment with his dog when he learned that then Attorney General William Barr had released his own summary of the Mueller report to the press. Now, Weissman said that this summary was twisted and politicized, and it let Trump off the hook when Weissman said that those were not necessarily their agreement inside the Mueller investigation. They really did have concerns about Trump's lawbreaking that they found, but they thought that Barr just swept it all under the rug in his summary. Now, in his book, Weissman points out all the ways that the Trump administration got in their way, how they all were saving and storing documents while they were doing this investigation in triplicate because they always were worried that the plug would be pulled on them at any time. They also used search warrants as a record of what they were doing. They filed more than 500 search warrants with extensive detail into each as sort of an anthology of what they were finding. So Weissman had this Team M summary written up, and he circulated it to other teams, and the New York Times requested this, and that's why we have it. Again, heavily redacted. Now, I do want to say this. As much as the press likes to decry the Mueller investigation, I think that if you read the book, it seems that they got it right, in my opinion. Weissman doesn't think so, but I do. In the end, they did not indict President Trump because they simply could not put a hard enough pin on what he had done to benefit Russia. There were things they could have charged him with, and he lays it all out in the book. But Mueller decided not to because he called them gray areas. And of course, you should not charge someone with gray areas. Mueller also believed that he would never have the chance, President Trump that is, to properly defend himself while he was in office, and he didn't want to do what he thought James Comey had done to Hillary Clinton, which is impugn her when she would not have her day in court. So Comey was speaking about Clinton's emails in the days just before the 2016 election, and she would not have a chance to defend herself in court before she went to the polls, right? So Mueller and Weissman thought that that was wrong, and they didn't want to do that to Trump. Okay, now Mueller's team could not prove whether Trump ever knew what he was doing or whether he knew that he had pro-Russia people swarming around him and his children trying to get them to do their bidding. The same question applies to Hunter Biden. But Biden is a lifelong politician who should have known that his son really couldn't be doing this stuff and offering him up as access. But we're going to get back to that in a second. But first to Team M. I know this was a long run up, but it's such a confusing story. And I feel like we need the context. So, okay, Team M started investigating Manafort, but Weissman says that already at the time there were 4 open investigations on Manafort when the special counsel began their work. Now, Manafort served as an advisor to Ukraine's president, Viktor Yanukovych, from 2010 until he fled to Russia in 2014, at which time Manafort stayed close to him on the Russian side, cozying up to Russian oligarchs who were close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The report even alleges that Manafort was part of the campaign that tried to frame the annexation of Crimea as a good thing because Ukrainians were persecuting Russians in that area. Okay, did we know that at the time, that Paul Manafort either believed that or was part of that? Manafort had close ties and earned a lot of money working with pro-Russian oligarchs inside of Russia, one of them being Oleg Deripaska, you may have heard this name, who helped Manafort help to advise on installing governments that were helpful to his business in Ukraine. Okay, Manafort joined the Trump campaign in the summer of 2016, but worked for free in order to boost his brand as an international politician. Indeed, after he was hired, he announced his hire to both the Ukrainian and the Russian governments, hoping that this would prompt Ukraine to pay him $2 million that they owed him on past projects. So Manafort was caught sending updates about the Trump campaign to Deripaska through Konstantin Kilimnik and Rick Gates over WhatsApp. Okay, Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian and a Ukrainian citizen. He served in the Russian government and reportedly worked for the Russian military, but also he has Ukrainian citizenship. And in the early 2000s, he was working as a pro-Russian force in Ukraine. So both sides, right? During the election, Manafort met with Kilimnik in New York City, and according to the summary, Manafort admitted at the August 2nd meeting that Kilimnik, this is a quote, discussed a plan that amounted to a means for Russia to take over the eastern part of Ukraine, which would then create a semi-autonomous region in eastern Ukraine and have Yanukovych elected to head that region. So this was a meeting happening in 2016, and it's happening right now. It's happening.
Right. So that he would take over the eastern piece.
Yes. That piece has not happened. But this plan to take over the eastern part of Ukraine was discussed by Manafort with pro-Russian agents in New York City in August of 2016.
So why the hell, okay, I get that this is the alternative version of the Mueller report. So, and Mueller says, well, I had each team write about these up for posterity.
Mueller didn't say that.
Weissman did.
Weissman wanted it done.
Yeah. So, okay, I had them all write this up for posterity. That's how Politico reported it back in December. So they all have this all written up. You guys have your team summary written up. This, to me, seems like a huge piece of the story. Like, why did we not see this in the Mueller report, the actual Mueller report?
There are
I'm not asking you
for
if you know the exact answer for this, but I mean, it seems to me like this is a big piece of it.
Yes, it is.
And certainly would have been useful in the run up to the war. Like if we knew this and government people actually knew this. And this is what bothers me too, is like if you're sitting on this shit to publish a book, right? Like if you're sitting on this stuff, this is a big question. Like if you have access to certain things like this, in the same criticism that came down about what's his name, Philip, remember, who was it? It was John Bolton. Remember Bolton, Ambassador Bolton, like apparently had all this like stuff that was going to come out in his book, which could have influenced the election, which could have,
Well, I think Weissman, he had to get his book vetted by the Justice Department. And he was given permission to publish. There's a lot about this meeting. Mm-hmm. And I think that, what he was less interested in this end game of Russia. He doesn't actually, seem to care much about what happens in that region. He cares that Manafort is involved in it, agrees to it, and says, okay, when Trump's elected, we'll work with you on to this aim.
So sort of, the opposite of what the Obama administration wanted, which was installing a puppet government Vladimir, in Kiev, and doing our bidding.
Yes.
So it's like the opposite of that. You're getting to see this play out in this way.
And so, the piece of this that it remains fiction is the Yanukovych part. Whereas this article that just from a few days ago, last we heard he was living in exile in Russia and is still trying to call for peace talks and warning Ukraine not to over rely on the West, right? Don't trust the West. Okay. So,
Well, it is interesting then you think about the Republican politics in all of this, right? Because you have Mitch McConnell, who is, vehemently trying to change the Republican Party away from Trump, stands out and says, I'm going to fly to meet with Zelensky.
Yes.
Show support to Zelensky. The Republican Party, Lindsey Graham, that wing of the Republican Party is right here to support you, Vladimir Zelensky. And then you have President Trump mocking him on stage at the NRA convention, saying, hey, instead of sending $40 billion to Ukraine, maybe we could actually do something here in the United States. Gas prices are through the roof, et cetera. So and you get to see this. Maybe it's a relationship with Putin. Maybe it's hey, we don't actually want you to have an all-out war.
Yes.
And you see this division right now in the Republican Party. It's fascinating to watch.
But to sort of pull this back together and look at the other side of it, right? So Ukraine was at the center of the first impeachment trial for President Trump, right? So a year later, in 2015, a year after Yanukovych left Ukraine, in 2015, up pops Hunter Biden, starting to work with pro-Ukraine companies, advising them on Ukrainian oil and gas through his ties to his company called Burisma. And he, at the time, was promising access to his father, Vice President Biden, at the time. So on the face of it, it does seem like what Biden was doing was what Manafort was also accused of, which is offering access to business ties, right, to someone that either is the president, will be the president, or is the vice president, right, on other sides of the fight. Now, this is not a right or wrong assessment. I'm simply pointing out that people connected to U.S. politicians have been using their influence for personal gain to exploit this Russian-Ukraine energy market and energy and borders and politics. And there's a lot of money there for a long time. But, Manafort is still paying this price because he now is even though he was pardoned, he's being sued again in the state of Florida. But Hunter Biden is also under investigation. And so this is the weird piece of it, right, is because President Trump went through his impeachment trials because he asked Zelensky to investigate Hunter Biden, right? And he held up aid in exchange for this political favor. But the Justice Department at the time said, well, we're not going to investigate Hunter Biden. And Trump thought that either he wanted it either for his own good or because he knew something. We can't say now, right? The Justice Department at the time said, we're not going to investigate Hunter Biden. But now they are saying that investigation has been underway since 2018. Which this timeline, it stinks, right? So I just kind of wrote notes. If you look at this timeline do you see it, number 11? Keep going down. Okay. What I'm confused about, and, I welcome your...
11. Let's see,
okay,
11.
You don't see it. So if in 2015, right, Hunter Biden starts his work in Ukraine, and then in 2016, Paul Manafort is offering his access to Trump, right, to overthrow Ukraine. And then in 2018, Hunter Biden is under investigation. But then in 2019, Trump asked Zelensky to do his own investigation in his own government, right? And then in December 2019, Trump is actually impeached for this, right? So there are so many questions here. Do you see how there are more questions than there are answers? If Hunter Biden was in fact under investigation, then maybe Trump was asking for something because he shouldn't know it, but maybe he would know it, right?
Right.
So then he was asking for something legitimate. Did Congress ever care? They went ahead with this impeachment, right? Why is the U.S. so bullish on defending Ukraine and not, say, other countries like Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Ethiopia? What you can see here, it's beyond the like, we're just the nice people who defend democracy. We have political ties to people making a lot of money.
A lot of money. And, you know, again, we learned about bio labs, in multiple bio labs and pharmaceutical labs inside of Ukraine. Like, this is well documented. The federal government, Victoria Nuland, confirmed it, that have gone back years there. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing there? Yes. And sometimes this is like when people talk about like the deep state.
Yeah.
And they want to feel like, and they're like, yeah, maybe the deep state, that's just a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, it's not. When you see these powers at work, when you talk to people that work at the CIA, when you talk to people that work formerly in the intelligence agencies, you know that we are simply pawns on a freaking chessboard.
Well, like this prediction, like, hey, Russia wants to take over this eastern part of Ukraine and keep Crimea and say that say that they're just protecting Russian interests there or people who are being persecuted. And like that happened. Someone close to Republican circles knew that in 2016. Was it really only Paul Manafort that knew that?
And all of the pieces were coming together ahead of time for, you know, the stoking of the Russian bear, so to speak, right? The idea that, oh, well, now you're amassing forces by Crimea again, which was the catalyst largely for Russia to invade the eastern part of Ukraine. And President Biden basically nailed the date on when this was going to happen. So yes, it all, you know, you can say it's conspiracy theories, but it all comes to fruition. Any more on this?
I mean, just more questions. No, but we welcome your input on it, because there are connections that someone like me who just like reads a book can't get to, right? But there's a lot of smokiness around powerful people, and those things are playing out in our real world, and then we're asked to participate in this war by like economic hardship. I give up.
Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. You know, we've been banned, we've been blocked, we've been censored. That's why we started our own website, to stay connected with you for free.
That's right. So head on over to redacted.inc and make sure you're connected with us. You can sign up again at redacted.inc, not .com.